So this morning's keynote speaker is Dr. Julie Groguer. Julie is a senior researcher in the CNRS Thales Laboratory south of Paris, where she leads the team on nano devices for neuromorphic computing. She received her PhD degree from the University of Pierre and Marie Curie in Paris, France. Her PhD thesis was dedicated to the study of a new effect in spintronics, the spin transfer torque. Her work is interdisciplinary, from the physics of spintronic and resistive switching materials to the development of learning algorithms for artificial intelligence. We're very thankful for Julie taking the time to give this presentation to us today, and I am very, very excited to hear it. And with that, I will turn it over to Julie.
Hello, everybody. Good morning or good afternoon. Here is afternoon. Okay, so let me share my screen. Okay. So how long do I have, Cathy, actually?
About 50 minutes or so, and then we'll take questions. Okay,
perfect. So in this talk, I would like to show how dynamics can enhance hardware neuromorphic systems. So as you know, the brain is a complex dynamical systems with synapses and neurons being dynamical elements that interact in a very complex way. And the brain presents several dynamical features, such as synchronization. When the neural spikes synchronize, this creates, when a large number of neurons synchronize, this creates some oscillations in some brain regions, and it's known that these synchronization effects that you can detect with EEG are in favor of communication in the brain. So for example, they can enhance inter-region communication. And we also know that dynamics, for example, spikes, can enable intrinsic learning because synapses in the brain are directly written by neuron spikes. And so in my group, we investigate how we could use these effects in neuromorphic systems in order to gain in computing power, in silicon area, and in energy. And in this talk, I would like to detail two roads that we are pursuing currently. The first one is to see how dynamical features such as complex transient dynamics, synchronization, and oscillations can enhance the computational properties of spintronic neural networks. And the other approach that we are investigating is how dynamics can help learning in hardware systems through an algorithm that is called equilibrium propagation. And so these will be the two disjoint parts of my talk. And I will start with spintronics. So I would like to show you what we are doing to investigate how dynamics can enhance the computational properties of spintronic neural networks. So you probably all know devices called magnetic tunnel junctions. So they are composed of two ferromagnets with in between a thin insulator. And you have two electrodes to bring current to the devices that can be scaled down to 10 nanometers. These magnetic tunnel junctions are now integrated into the production lines of major foundries, which means that they are compatible with CMOS. And there are already gigabytes demonstrators of non-volatile memories with these elements. Indeed, when the magnetizations in the two magnetic layers point parallel or anti-parallel, this corresponds to a bit 0 or a bit 1. This, the magnetizations so when you're using these elements as memory, you are only concerned about the static configuration of the magnetization. But in fact, magnetic elements are dynamic. A magnetization is a vector, a spin that you can excite with microwaves or with DC signal. And in this talk here, well, what we are looking for in my team is to use these dynamical properties of magnetic elements for neuromorphic computing. And so what happens is that if you send a current through this tiny cylinder, the electrons first go through the first magnetic layer, and here they acquire some spins, and then they can transfer this spin to the second magnetic layer, and so it makes the magnetization spin. And when the magnetization precesses, there is, because these elements are magnetoresistive, you have a voltage that rises across the device. And when the magnetization precesses, this creates an oscillating voltage. So the curve that you are seeing here is an experiment. And so you see that these devices are in fact nonlinear oscillators. So you send a DC current, and what you collect is an oscillating voltage. And these oscillations are complex. So when you send more current through your device, you actually send more spins to the top magnetization. And so you can make it spin faster. And also you are going to modify the orbit of precession. So the amplitude of the oscillations and their frequency depend on the current that you inject. And so you see that we have here a very tiny oscillator that has exactly the same structure as magnetic memories, with a power consumption that can be down to microwatts when these devices are scaled down to tens of nanometers. And so we want to use this for as a building block for a neuromorphic computing. So how can we do that? Well, what happens with spintronic oscillators, you see that they convert inputs in a complex way. So I have already shown their nonlinearity. So you put a DC current and you obtain a fast oscillation. And also they have a short-term memory. So for example, here, if we send this kind of DC current input to the oscillator, you see that the output signal that we collect is much more complex than the input. Not only do we have oscillations with an amplitude that depends non-linearly on the current input, but in addition, you see that there is a kind of reaction time of the oscillator. It doesn't change orbit immediately, so there is a relaxation, and this relaxation can be seen as a short-term memory. Okay, so what the oscillator does is that it takes an input and it transform it into something much more complex. And actually, this can be used to separate input data. This is exactly the principle of reservoir computing. The idea is that if you have a complex dynamical system and that you want to classify inputs, when you are going to apply your inputs to this very complex dynamical system, the behavior generated in this reservoir is going to be much more complex than the inputs. And so the resulting signals are going to be more separated. And then you can simply probe these signals and recombine them with a weighted sum to produce the network output. And so complex dynamics plus intrinsic memory is going to facilitate data separation. So we have used this approach of reservoir computing and the rich dynamics of a hardware nano oscillator to recognize spoken digits. And so we used a single oscillator using time multiplexing. We have been able to emulate a neural network of 400 neurons. And what is important is that on this benchmark task of reservoir computing, we have obtained a success rate of 99.6%, which is as good as software. So it means that our oscillator has complex enough dynamics to separate the data correctly, enough memory to recognize time-varying waveforms, but also that despite its very tiny scale, here 400 nanometer, it is stable enough to process information accurately. Okay, and so here it's a first way of using dynamics to compute. Another way is to use nonlinear dynamics, not to separate data, but to group input data within classes. And for this, we can use another very interesting effect that arises in interacting nonlinear oscillators is the effect of synchronization. When you have oscillators that have different frequencies, but that somehow communicate through their signals when they interact together. If their frequencies are close enough, or if they interact with an external signal, suddenly they can all synchronize and share the same frequency. And in that case, the overall signal is going to be strongly enhanced. And so you can use that to group, to recognize input data. So for example, imagine you have an assembly of oscillators. Different inputs, different classes could correspond to different groups of oscillators that are synchronized, as illustrated in this sketch. And so spintronic nano oscillators can synchronize. So here, this is an experiment where you see 3 of these spintronic oscillators, and here the brown line corresponds to the oscillators when they are not interacting. They are isolated. So you see they have 3 different frequencies. But now if we connect these oscillators in series, because each of them emits these voltage oscillations, they are going to be electrically connected, and so they can synchronize. And you see that when they synchronize, you have this very strong signal that is easy to recognize and that can to detect, and that can signal that they have grouped some data together. And so what we have done is that we have used this ability of spintronic oscillators to synchronize mutually, or to synchronize to external signals, to recognize input signals, here vowels. So what we have done is that we have emulated, we have kind of implemented a 2 layers neural network. So the first layer consists of 2 microwave sources, so this is lab equipment, but the second layer is consists of 4 nano oscillators that are connected in series. So what we do is that above the oscillators, there is some kind of strip line, like 300 nanometers above the oscillators. And we send into this current line signals coming from the first neurons, okay? And so when these signals come into the strip line, as they are oscillating at different frequencies, they are going to create some magnetic fields above the oscillators. And the magnetization of the oscillator is going to be modified and can synchronize to these input signals. Now what you see in blue is, so this is what we measure on the spectrum analyzer. So in blue, these are the oscillators when there is no input, so you have 4 frequencies. And here in dark, in navy blue, you see the result when we input, when we have some inputs. And what happens here is that the first 3 oscillators are not, their dynamics is not much modified, but the 4th oscillator, you see the peak seems to have disappeared, and in fact, it has synchronized to input B. And through this process, by looking at which oscillator synchronized to which input data, or to which input signal, we have been able to recognize vowels that were encoded into the frequency of the input signals. And so here you see that we group data into classes through this dynamical phenomena. So this is nice, but here what you see is that we have very simple systems with only here 1 layer of nano oscillators, and also in these systems there are no synapses. We send the microwave signals of the sources here directly in a strip line, so it's like having fixed synapses in this small neural network. And we know that in order to achieve a high accuracy in a neural network, you need to make deep neural network where you have several layers of neurons connected by tunable electronic synapses that are going to enable a state-of-the-art learning. And so the question that we asked ourselves is, can we build a dynamical deep neural network based on magnetic tunnel junctions? And so for this, our idea was to use the fact that the oscillations produced by the magnetic tunnel junctions are in the radio frequency range. So depending on the materials that you are using, or the size also, the thickness of the magnetic layers, the oscillations that are produced can be between 10 megahertz and 20 gigahertz, okay? And once you have chosen this frequency, when you change the DC current that you apply or the magnetic field, you can also tune this frequency. And when we modify, so actually you can see these elements as microwave neurons because they take a DC current as input. They and then if you measure their emitted microwave power as a function of the DC current, you see that the microwave power evolves like a rectified linear unique. So it's like an activation function for a neuron. So basically what this element is doing is that it takes a current, it applies a nonlinearity on it, a rectified linear nonlinearity, and then it can broadcast the output in the form of a radio frequency signal. And so we thought, can we use this radio frequency communication possibility to build a network of magnetic tunnel junction? And so then the question was, okay, so we could have layers of neurons like that broadcast their radio frequency signals, but how can we connect them? How can we make some synapses that will implement a multiply and accumulate operation on the microwave powers emitted by the neurons? We wanted to achieve this very important function of neural network. And so our idea was to use, in fact, exactly the same element as for the neurons, a magnetic tunnel junction to do the synaptic operation, but this time we are not going to use it as an oscillator, we are going to use it as a resonator. So what's the difference? In an oscillator, in a nonlinear oscillator, you put a DC direct input and you collect an oscillating voltage. And here, we are going to send an oscillating input and collect a direct voltage. So what's happening? A magnetization, again, is a dynamical element. So actually, you can see the magnetization as confined in an energy well. And so when you send a microwave input to the magnetic dot, if the microwave signal is close to the resonance frequency of this magnetization, you can induce its resonance. So it's going to start to have precessions, okay? And so, and it's going to oscillate at the same frequency as the input signal. So what's happening is that you send this microwave current, you induce through a resonance effect an oscillation of the magnetization that is converted into a voltage oscillation, resistance oscillation, and at the same frequency. And so if you look at the voltage here, the multiplication of these two signals, the mixing of these two signals is going to give rise to a direct voltage. And so this is an experiment that I'm showing you on a junction. So here you have this direct voltage as a function of the frequency of the input microwave signal, okay? So here is the resonance frequency of the junction. So the signal is basically 0 at the resonance frequency and has this kind of a shape, anti-Lorentzian shape, we describe it that way, around this resonance frequency. So this shape is due to the multiplication, the mixing of the two signals. And what is important here to see is that, of course, the more microwave power we send, the larger the resonant effect, and so the more voltage we collect, actually. And so what you see here is that the measured DC voltage is proportional to the input microwave power. And so it's like it multiplies the microwave power by a synaptic weight. And it's interesting because the synaptic weight value is going to depend on the difference between the resonance frequency of our magnetic tunnel junction and the input frequency of the microwave signal. You see that if the input frequency is larger than the resonant frequency, here we have a positive signal that increases when the microwave power increases. So this is a positive weight, but here we have a negative signal that corresponds to negative weight. Okay, so this element, the magnetic tunnel junction used this time as a resonator, can act like a synaptic weight that can be positive or negative. It's actually controlled by the difference, by the value of the resonance of the magnetic tunnel junction with respect to the input frequency. And actually, we can tune this synaptic weight by changing the resonance frequency of the junction. So how can we use the resonant frequency of a magnetic tunnel junction? Well, we can, for example, apply a magnetic field, and this magnetic field is going to stabilize or destabilize the magnetization, and so it's going to change the frequency. You see here, we use a strip line above the junction, and you see how the curve gets shifted, which corresponds to a shift in the resonance frequency. So here, this is a volatile way, and it consumes a lot of energy to modify the synaptic weight, the resonance frequency. But there are many other ways to do that in spintronics, and in particular, there are non-volatile ways to modify magnetization frequencies through interface effects. That would be nice to use in the future, but here we just want to give a proof of concept. What you see is that when we change the resonance frequency of the junction, the voltage as a function of the input power response changes. So the proportionality goes, the slope goes from positive to negative. So we go from positive weight to negative weight. And so how can we, so here we have one synapse, basically. How can we implement the multiply and accumulate operation? The idea is to use frequency multiplexing. So we want to perform not only one multiplication, but the sum of this operation. So what we do is that instead of collecting the voltage across only one resonator, we are going to connect them electrically in series, and we are going to measure the voltage across the different resonators. And in order to have the sum that we want, so the inputs are different microwave powers coming that would, in a neural network, come from different neurons. And what we are going to do is that we are going to use the fact that these resonators, they are like filters, so they cover a narrow frequency band. And so we are going to arrange the different resonance frequency so that the resonators really cover different frequency bands, and that also we are going to multiplex the input signals so that this neuron here, its frequency falls within the window of this resonator. The frequency of the second neuron talks only to the second resonator, and so on and so forth. And if we do that, we are going to have this weighted sum of the input microwave signal by this chain of magnetic tunnel junction resonators. And what is nice, you see, is that frequency multiplexing allows a very simple arrangement of the devices. Instead of having to have all these wirings here to perform the weighted sum, we only need one chain of resonator. This is something that is due to the frequency multiplexing. So what we have done recently is that we have demonstrated experimentally a radio frequency MAC operation with two junctions as synapses. So we have two magnetic tunnel junctions. We send two microwave signals, and we can change the weights of these two junctions by applying different magnetic fields on the junction. So these are the response of the junction. And what you see here is the result of the, this is the experimental multiply and accumulate operation on the microwave power versus the ideal MAC operation. And you see that it follows the trend very well. And we have shown that with this error, we can classify simple things accurately. Now, this is just for one chain. Now, if we want to make a neural network with several outputs, what we have to do is simply add more chains of magnetic tunnel junctions. And in each chain, we are going to send the same multiplex signals. And in that way, each chain can perform the operation. And what is nice again is that you see that instead of having 8 wires here, we only need 2 chains. So again, here the frequency multiplexing can bring some capacity to the network, to the hardware network, and a simple way to forward the information. And so what we want to do now is to build. So now we have the neurons, we have the multiply and accumulate operation. And of course, what we want to do is to build a hierarchical neural network with several layers connected together through this principle. So again, neurons take DC as input and they emit microwaves, and synapses take microwaves, perform a multiply and accumulate operation, and convert it to DC voltage that can then be sent to the neurons, and so on and so forth. And what is nice is that not only do we have radio frequency communications in this network, but also it's built by using the same devices repeated one after the other. And in addition, we could potentially directly, natively classify RF inputs because our devices are naturally sensitive to electromagnetic signals. So this is very interesting for medicine or RF fingerprinting application. And so we now are trying to build this kind of spintronic deep neural network, fully radio frequency. And of course, in the future, what we would like to do is to, so here we exploit radio frequency oscillations between junctions. And then we would like, of course, to go further and to see how we could use their dynamical properties. So the fact that these oscillations can produce rich dynamics to learn in these networks. Okay, and so this brings me to the second part of my talk that is for now completely disjoint from the first part, is how can we use dynamics for learning. And I would like to show you that dynamics can unlock intrinsic learning in neural network through an algorithm that is deeply rooted in physics, that is called equilibrium propagation, that I think is very suited, because of its physical origin, is very suited for learning in physical nanosystems. So why do we want to do that? Well, the first thing is that state-of-the-art learning is by error propagation, of course, because this is gradient descent allows to minimize an objective function, the global objective function as the output, but error propagation is not hardware friendly. So why is it so? This is because, well, if you want to do error backpropagation in hardware, well, first you need to build a hardware neural network. And as we have seen, this is what we are trying, for example, to do with spintronics. It's not an easy task. You need to devise, you need your nano neurons, your nano synapses. You need to do all the functions that you want. You need to connect them together. So it's already very, very difficult. If you succeed, you can then use this hardware neural network to do the forward pass. But if you want to perform learning on chip, you are far from done. You need to compute the cost function at the output. And then you need to use the chain rule of derivatives to find by how much you need to modify each synaptic weight. Okay. And so if you want to do that in hardware, well, you need another circuit to compute the gradients. And you need to store all these gradients somewhere. And because you have one gradient per synapse, you have a huge memory on the side of your physical neural network. And then you are not finished because you need to write the synaptic weights at each pass. And for this, if you don't want to write the synaptic weights one by one, you are going to need a parallel programming circuits on all your weights, which of course is going to be incredibly complex. And it's really a huge challenge to do all that in hardware with a high accuracy without losing the initial low energy and capacity of your physical neural network. And so this is why, for now, most chips are doing inference and do not implement learning through backprop. And this is also why there is such huge efforts to try to achieve that efficiently. However, this is not at all how things are occurring in the brain. In the brain, you have neurons that are dynamical. They are not static mathematical activation functions. They emit spikes, as you know. And these spikes are going to, it's not some signals computed by an external circuit that are going to program the synaptic weights. No, synapses are going to evolve directly through the spikes of the neurons that they connect. And so a well-known learning rule to modify the synaptic weight according to the spiking of pre and post neurons is the spike timing dependent plasticity. And so the advantage of such a method is that it's very, very, I mean, for the brain, it's what it uses, but for hardware, it's really nice because you could program the synapses directly with the spikes of the voltage spikes of neurons. And this is what most neuromorphic chips actually use for learning. So they have spiking neurons, and these spiking neurons have some voltage waveforms that evolve with time. And so, for example, if you have a memory store synapse between two neurons, it has been shown that if you are careful in the way you shape the spikes of neurons, you can have, you can directly implement the spike timing dependent plasticity by the overlap of the voltage spikes of neurons. And so this is very nice because in that case, you don't need all the additional circuits to compute the gradients. You really gain in energy and in capacity. The problem is that these spiking neural networks through STDP, for example, have a low accuracy because they do not minimize an energy function at the output here. And so in order to avoid this problem, what has been proposed is to use 3-factor learning rules where the weight changes is going to depend on the local voltage spikes of the pre and post neuron, but also where you add a third factor that is going to account for supervision. And that is going to enable a form of gradient descent and to minimize an objective function in the network. And of course, this has been very successful and it gives rise to enhanced accuracy. However, in hardware, it can be complex to add this third factor, as shown by Melika in this paper. And what I would like to show you is that by modifying an algorithm called equilibrium propagation, we could perform gradient descent or a form of gradient descent for on-chip learning with low energy and high accuracy with only a 2-factor learning rule. So what is equilibrium propagation? It's a learning algorithm for dynamical energy-based system. So it applies to, so you have a deep neural network with activation functions. And the difference with a standard deep neural network is twice. The neurons are dynamical. so they evolve with time. So the state of a neuron is characterized by this function Si that evolve with time. And the synapses are bidirectional. So the signals can propagate in both directions. If you do that, it has been shown that such a network is going to derive from an energy function. So here it's an example. It applies to all kinds of energy functions, all kinds of physical systems, but a typical energy function can be a Hopfield-like energy function as written here. In this expression, rho is the activation function of the neuron. And so what happens is that you are going to apply inputs to your network. And because it derives from an energy function, when you clamp the neurons, the input neurons to the input values, you are going to induce some perturbations, dynamical perturbation in your neural network. But because it derives from an energy function, it's always going to stabilize, get to an equilibrium. And that equilibrium, the derivative of the energy versus the neuron state, by definition, is zero. And this is this property that is used in equilibrium propagation for finding for programming the synaptic weights. So how does it work? So there are two phases. The first phase, called the free phase, corresponds to inference, if you want. So what you do is that you apply your new inputs to your network and you clamp the input neurons to these values. And as I said, when you change the input, well, because it's a dynamical neural network and that the information propagates in both directions, everything is going to be strongly modified. But at some point, the network is going to find an equilibrium. And at equilibrium, we have this property. And the idea is to wait for this equilibrium and then to measure all the states of the neurons. And then what we want is to, what we are going to do is to look at the error at the output. And if this error is not zero, what we want is to bring the network closer to a configuration where the error is smaller. How can we have a smaller error? What Benjamin Cellier and Yoshua Bengio proposed is to nudge the output of the network towards the solution. So this is a dynamical system, right? And it's a physical system. So you can imagine that you apply some kind of spring-like force to the output neurons and you bring them closer to the desired solution. Okay, this corresponds to modifying the energy function by adding a factor proportional to the cost function. And so when you do that, you nudge the output neurons because the signals propagate in both directions, you are going again to modify the configuration of all neurons. Everything is going to move, but at some time it's going to go to equilibrium. And you wait for this equilibrium and you measure the state of all neurons. And they have all been modified and we call them in this way here. And because we are at equilibrium, we have this property. The derivative of the energy versus the neuron state is zero, but this time we have an additional term proportional to the cost function. And now you see that if we do the difference between these two phases, through very simple math, you find that the state of neurons have been modified by a quantity that is proportional to the derivative of the cost function versus the neuron state. So this means that neurons, through their dynamics, are going to compute the gradients, okay? But here we have the gradients versus neuron state, and what we want is to find the gradients for synapses, right? And so here you again can do very simple mathematics, and you will find that the weight variation prescribed by this algorithm is the following. It's the difference, you do a difference between the two phases of the activation functions of neurons before and after, well, I mean, against the two phases, sorry. It's a bit confusing, but here the learning rule is written. And so rho is the activation function, S is the state of neurons. And what is very interesting is that what you see here is that this is a local learning rule. The weight change depends only on the, for synapse IJ of neuron I and neuron J. And so what we have done recently is show mathematically what I have described in a very hand-wavy way, is that there is a mathematical equivalence of this local learning rule with gradient descent, in fact, with backpropagation through time. And we have shown that, so one difficulty to simulate these neural networks, this algorithm, is that you have a very complex system of coupled differential equations that you have to solve. And so simulations take a lot of time. But we have been able to show that this algorithm can scale and solve complex tasks such as CIFAR-10, and it can implement convolutional neural networks. So in principle, if we were able to speed up our simulation, we could tackle tasks like ImageNet, but this remains to be demonstrated. And also, we have shown recently that although this algorithm seems really dedicated to analog neural networks because of its dynamics feature, actually, it can also train binary neural network. We have applied training procedures similar to BNNs to ECPROP. And we have shown that it can learn with binary synapses and that we can even binarize the activation function of neurons. And in that case, gradients are ternary. And it's interesting because if we can use only switches and binary synapses in hardware neural networks, they are going to be much more resilient to noise, and we could use digital electronics. Okay, but until now, although this is very interesting, what we have done is that with equilibrium propagation, we have only replaced the gradient computation part. We perform the inference phase, we measure the state of neurons, we perform the nudging phase, we measure the state of neurons, we do a difference, and we find the synaptic weight change, but we still need to store the gradients and program the synapses. So can we do better? And our idea was to implement a spike inversion of equilibrium propagation that performs gradient descent without any peripheral circuit. And so actually, what we found is that to implement equilibrium propagation, you don't need to wait for the end of the nudging phase. What we can do is perform a free phase, wait for equilibrium, and then during the nudging phase, if we modify a bit the learning rule, and if we update the weights according to this rule here that is now dynamical, you see that the variation through time of a synapse depend on the activation function and the derivative of the activation functions. If we, during the nudging phase, while we nudge the outputs, we modify synapses in this way, then we learn through equilibrium propagation. And so we thought, well, this is really nice, because then what we could do is use this learning rule to learn in a spiking neural network. How can we do that? Well, you see here, the learning rule depends on rho, that is the activation function. So if we translate that to a neural network, to a spiking neural network, it means that rho is the spike rate of a neuron, okay? And now if we look more closely at this learning rule, now we think that rho is a frequency, and that rho dot is a derivative of frequency. You see that it means that if now we have a spiking neural network, in order to implement this rule here, what we need to do is that each time neuron I spikes, we update the synaptic weight with a value proportional to the derivative of the rate. Okay, this is what is written here. And so this is very simple. All you have to do is to have a circuit that takes the spike train and computes the derivative of the rate. And so we have proposed here a simple circuit composed of elements that could be implemented in analog electronics. And what we did is that we have simulated this circuit. So each time neuron I spikes, each neuron is equipped with these circuits that computes the derivative of the rate and that can apply synaptic weight change to the synapse. Okay, and so here this is the first part of the learning rule. If we want to do both parts, we need a more complex circuit with spike detection. And so we have simulated in software this algorithm, this spiking algorithm, and we have shown that with this kind of spiking neural network, on MNIST, we achieve an accuracy of 97.6, which is very interesting because this is a local two-factor learning rule. And you see that we make a huge improvement compared to the other local two-factor learning rule that is STDP. And also note that we have here smaller neural networks than these ones. And so we can probably gain in accuracy by adding another hidden layer. And why this is interesting? It's because here we have a procedure for intrinsic learning on chip. I mean, we only need to build this neural network to nudge the outputs, provide the inputs, nudge the outputs, and it's going to learn intrinsically. And what is nice is that this algorithm is also compatible with memory store synapses. So we need to write each synapse by an amount that is proportional to the rate derivative of the spike train. And in fact, we can do that with memory stores by using the standard procedure of spike overlap. So a memory store weight change can be schematized in this way. So here you have the change of the conductance as a function of the voltage that is applied. And what is interesting is that a memory store is a nonlinear element. And so below a threshold voltage, the conductance does not change, but above this threshold is going to change. And so our idea is to have, you know, that we have a neuron that is going to output spikes with an amplitude that is equal to the rate derivative. And the other neuron is going to have spikes with this kind of shape just below the threshold for the memory store. And so if we only have these spikes independently, they are not going to modify the conductance because they are going to be both lower to the threshold. But if they overlap, then the voltage applied to the memory store is going to exceed the threshold by an amount proportional to this quantity. So we are going to modify the memory store as we want. And what we have proposed, we propose a simple crossbar geometry with some to implement this concept. So I'm not going to go into detail, but what is interesting here is that the complexity of our method is not in the synapse, but it is in the neurons. You see that neurons are more complicated because we need this module to compute ODOT, and we need the bidirectionality, so we need some current mirrors. Oops. But potentially what is interesting is that because there are much more synapses than neurons in a network, by keeping the synapse simple, we could keep the overall circuit much more compact. And so, of course, now what we want to do is to provide some hardware implementation of XSpike. And we think that they are really an interesting road for learning on chip on physical neural network, because here we we have a local two-factor learning rules to provide gradient descent. And also what I really like in equilibrium propagation is that it really takes its roots in physics. And also here we provide an algorithm for learning with memory stores, with spiking neurons. It could apply to many other kinds of physical systems. And yes, sorry, I forgot. Again, I want to insist that here, you only need your physical neural network. You get rid of all these additional circuits, and still you have gradient descent. And in addition, you have really intrinsic learning. Okay, so I come to my conclusion. So in this talk, there were two parts. In the first part, by considering spintronic neural networks, I tried to show how dynamics can enhance the computational properties of physical neural networks by separating data, this is reservoir computing, by binding data, here we were exploiting synchronization, and also by exploiting oscillations to enable RF connections in a neural network. And our goal in the future is to combine these things together and to build this kind of deep RF dynamical neural networks. In the second part, I showed that we can use dynamics. I mean, here's the ability of a system to dynamically converge to equilibrium to implement intrinsic learning in a spiking neural network. We call this algorithm XSpike. It is compatible with memory stores and CMOS spiking neurons. And again, we are working on proving experimentally that this can work. We did some simulations that show that we can reach state-of-the-art for spiking neural networks that learn on chip. And for now, these two parts were completely disjoint, but in the future, because ECPROP applies to any physical system, as long as it's dynamical and has bidirectional connections, we hope that we can use this algorithm also to learn efficiently in this complex spintronic neural network. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Julie. That was fantastic. I know Malika and I both have many questions, but we'll also open up the floor to anybody. Feel free to raise your hand or put questions in the chat. Okay, Marianne.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you very much. I also have a lot of questions, so I just picked a few. So my first question is for the first part of your talk, how close you can put nano oscillators together to make sure that there are not any impact from the neighboring magnetic fields. And the other two questions go to the second part. First question is that—
Can I, do you mind, Mariam, if I'm afraid I will forget, can we do one by one?
Sure, okay.
Okay, so for the first, yes, so for your question, if we put the oscillator too close together, yes, there are going to be we are going to generate magnetic fields that are going to influence each other. So basically, it has been shown that if they are apart from more than once or twice their diameter, the interaction is very small. So we can still densely pack them without them influencing each other. But if we could think of using this, to create some lateral connection in layers also.
And it probably also depends on how much voltage or current is passing through them. So it depends on the application. So I want to know that how fixed is that? So can we have a rule of thumb for that?
Okay, so they really interact. So when they are not electric, yes. So yes. Okay, it's a complicated question, but I think the major source of interaction when you put them close together is the magnetic field lines that they generate when the magnetization is rotating. And this, we can really remove this if we put them apart more than one time their diameter. So it's not a huge constraint.
Oh, okay, perfect, thank you. So for the second part, you were mentioning about that we should wait until they reach the equilibrium and then do the rest. So my question to you is that how predictable is the time that we need to wait until we reach the equilibrium?
Yes, it's a very good question. It really depends on the dynamics of the system and the individual elements. So it has to be computed, I mean, so in hardware, it can be very fast if you have very fast oscillators. Like we have, for example, in spintronics, we have gigahertz oscillators. So I think relaxation can be very fast. So.
Okay, perfect. So it's calculatable. It's not something that we don't know beforehand. Okay, awesome. So the last question is that, so for the local weights, my question is that, so based on the equation that you showed for the local weights, this shows that neighboring neurons won't affect the weight for for example, INJ. Is this correct?
Local weights, yes. So
yes.
It means that synapse is going to be modified only according to the spikes of neuron INJ. Yeah.
So the local neurons won't affect that.
So sorry, I didn't get.
So I want to just make sure that, for example, okay, so I want to make sure that the synapse connecting I to J is only the weight for this is only depends on the neuron I and neuron J. So neighboring neurons that are not connected with that synapse won't affect the weights for that synapse.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Brady?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, great.
Hello.
So for the equivalent or equilibrium propagation, is it possible in such a network, or especially in a network with recurrent connections, for it to be impossible for it to converge to equilibrium, such as in like an oscillatory state?
Okay, so I'm not skilled enough in math to show it, to show the theorem, but apparently if you have a bidirectional synapses, it is going to converge. So then there is another version of equilibrium propagation that has been developed with unidirectional synapses. It's called vector field equilibrium propagation. And in that case, convergence is not guaranteed. But when you have bidirectional synapses, it is guaranteed.
Okay. Would having recurrent connections cause the model to change any, or could you implement it in the same fashion?
So here, in what I showed, the connections are recurrent in the sense that they are
bidirectional.
Bidirectional, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
We have a question in the chat from Alex Jones. How much would external noise, such as cell phone signals, FM radio, etc., interfere with this network? Would it need proper shielding to work correctly?
Yes. It would need some kind of shield, but I think something very similar to hard drive. You know, they have a kind of shield. I think something like that would work. Yeah.
Okay, Malika, did you want to ask a question?
Sure. Yes. Thanks a lot, Gina. That was really great. I wanted to also ask one question per each section of your talk. So in the first one, so I noticed that, for example, like slide 15, so basically where you
share my screen again. Here?
Yes. So basically you were saying that the weight is a function of the frequency, and then by changing the volt, so that changes the voltage, which then you can detect as a weight. But that voltage is really changing by microvolts, and that's I'm not sure. So what kind of CMOS circuitry would be needed to detect this really small change, or what is your setup? How do you detect that?
Yes, you're right. It's a small change. Okay, so now this is what we have in our junctions now. It could be larger, we hope. Now, this is one junction, so we will have chains of junctions. So we hope we can also enhance this signal because they are going to be summed. And for the CMOS, to sense this voltage with CMOS, yes, we are now working with CMOS designers to do that. So,
so basically you're saying that this is not something intrinsic to this kind of devices. It is just happens that the ones that are built right now are like this, but this is not something physical or intrinsic to MTJs necessarily.
Let's say now, yeah, tens of microvolts is what we have. It's very much linked to the tunnel magnetoresistance. So, I mean, we are using junctions with like 50% TMR or something like that. So if we have 300%, it can be increased. We hope it's going to be summed So it can increase also, and then you are right. There is a question of CMOS design and how we convert this so that it fits the next, so that we can send it to the oscillators after. But actually, yes. So it needs to be designed, these amplifiers, and so this is something we are with our collaborators we are working on now.
And can you comment on generally, because I'm not so familiar actually with MTJs, what is the variability on them? So would the variability kind of be, let's say, below this microvolts between devices and between cycles, or?
Yes, the variability on the amplitude, yes, is going to be much smaller than that, yes.
Much smaller than this, okay. Okay, great. And then the other question that I had was also related to the second part, which was really great. But so I was just wondering if this could still be this kind of like equilibrium propagation type learning can be online, because you would have to like do a biphasic type of processing. So you would have to do inference and then wait. And then depending on how fast your input signal is streaming, then I don't know how would
yes,
you...
Yes. So for now, the algorithm as it exists really depends on, processes only static inputs, right? So,
okay,
so you apply a static input, and then, so what we do in the simulation is that for the free phase, we wait for a fixed time, and then we perform the nudging phase. And so it could learn online, but for now, it's something, a limitation of this algorithm for now is that it processes only static inputs. It would need to be modified to process waveforms. This is something we want to think about also, because it's, of course, very important.
Okay, thanks a lot, Julie. This was really fantastic.
I will limit myself to one question. So on your on the second part of the talk, talking about the MNIST results, where you had the smaller network for MNIST that achieves comparable accuracy to some of the state-of-the-art results. Do you see any issues with complexifying the network with adding layers, whether that be algorithmically or in hardware?
Sorry, so your question is about adding layers? Okay, so if it's more, is it a problem in hardware, you mean? Or?
Problem in hardware, or is there anything that would affect it algorithmically as you increase the number of layers?
Okay, so for example, when we did CIFAR 10 with ZecProp, we had, I think, 5 hidden layers, so you can increase the depths, the complex. I mean, in software, it's the deeper the network, the more time it takes to compute its dynamics. So it's it's a limit. Yeah. In hardware, also probably it would take a bit longer to converge, but this is not something we did evaluate.
Okay, great.
But it's a parallel network, right? So it would all relax together. It's not like you're going to exponentially increase the time when you increase the number. Yes.
Absolutely. Okay, does anybody have any other questions? Thank you again, Julie. This was fantastic. Oh, Shruti has a question. We'll give Shruti a shot to give a question, and then, yeah, we'll close up.
Oh, sorry for the delay. Hi, Julie. Thank you for the nice talk. I just wanted to know, like, regarding the simulations, did you use any open source simulators to carry out them, or like, did you have your own script for doing that, performing, like you said, the differential equations were pretty complex?
Yes. No, for now we did our own. We wanted to see if we could use some kind of SNN frameworks, but for now they were not compatible with what we wanted to do. So we did our own, which probably is not optimized indeed for speed. But...
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you again, Julie. We really appreciate it. That was fantastic.
Thanks a lot.
And yeah, so we will now take a break until 11:30 a.m. Eastern time, so about 25 minutes. We'll resume then with our full talks on algorithms for hardware. Thanks, everybody.